My stepson looked directly at me across his fiancée's family dinner table and explained, to 7 people meeting me for the first time, "He's not really part of this family, just someone Mom married a while back." I smiled, passed the potatoes, and finished dinner without a single word of correction. My name's Richard. I married my wife Sandra 12 years ago. Her son from her first marriage, Connor, was 15 at the time. Old enough to have clear opinions about a stepfather entering the picture, young enough that I genuinely hoped, over time, some version of a real relationship might develop between us. For the most part, it didn't. Connor was polite in the specific distant way teenagers manage when they've decided in advance that warmth isn't required, and that politeness calcified into adulthood as a permanent, comfortable arrangement neither of us ever seriously challenged. He called me Richard, never Dad, never anything warmer, and I accepted that boundary without pushing against it. What Connor never knew, because I never made a habit of announcing it, was that shortly after marrying Sandra, I'd opened a dedicated education trust specifically earmarked for Connor's eventual graduate education, funding it quietly and consistently for over a decade through automatic contributions from my own consulting income. By the time of that dinner, the fund held just over $93,000, structured to become fully accessible to Connor upon acceptance into any accredited graduate program. I never told him it existed, partly because I wanted it to be a genuine surprise whenever the right moment arrived, and partly, if I'm honest, because some quiet part of me wanted to see whether our relationship might eventually warm on its own terms, before I ever needed to use a college fund as leverage for connection I hadn't earned through actual closeness. Connor got engaged to a woman named Melissa about 8 months ago, and Sandra and I were invited to a formal dinner with Melissa's parents, the Whitfields, to properly meet before the wedding. Planning began in earnest. I want to be clear that I went into that dinner with genuinely good intentions, hoping to make a warm impression on Connor's soon-to-be in-laws, understanding my role clearly as Sandra's husband, and, by extension, someone connected to this family celebration, even if not centrally featured in it. Conversation moved pleasantly enough through appetizers, with the usual getting-to-know-you questions circulating around the table. Then Melissa's father, a friendly, curious man named Gordon, turned to me directly and asked, kindly enough, "So, Richard, how long have you been part of the family?" Before I could answer, Connor jumped in, his tone casual, almost dismissive. "Oh, he's not really part of the family exactly. Just someone Mom married a while back. It's a whole separate thing." The table didn't go silent exactly. Gordon simply nodded politely, and the conversation moved forward to other topics, the comment absorbed into dinner, small talk without anyone else seeming to register it as particularly significant. Sandra's hand found mine under the table, a small, apologetic squeeze that told me she'd heard it clearly and felt genuinely uncomfortable on my behalf. I didn't correct Connor in front of his future in-laws. I smiled, made a small joke about being the quiet supporting character in this family's story, which got a polite laugh, and let dinner continue without further comment on the matter. I want to be honest that the comment itself didn't shock me terribly. 12 years of Richard Never Dad had prepared me reasonably well for exactly this kind of casual dismissal, delivered without particular malice, simply reflecting how Connor had genuinely always categorized our relationship in his own mind. I didn't make any decision that night, driving home, in some immediate emotional reaction. Sandra and I discussed it briefly. She apologized on Connor's behalf, and I told her honestly that I didn't need her to apologize for an accurate reflection of how her son genuinely viewed our relationship after 12 years. What I did do over the following week was sit with a specific question I hadn't fully confronted before. Was I continuing to fund Connor's graduate education out of genuine care for his future, or was I doing it, at least partially, in hopes of eventually earning a closeness that Connor had just publicly confirmed to strangers he had no intention of extending regardless? I met with my financial advisor and formally redirected the education trust. I didn't liquidate it or spend it frivolously. I restructured it entirely legally, naming my own niece, Sandra's sister's daughter, Emily, as the new beneficiary. A bright, hard-working young woman who'd always treated me warmly, without ever needing a college fund to motivate that warmth in the first place. Connor found out about the fund's existence, ironically, only after he'd been accepted into a graduate engineering program about 4 months after that dinner, and mentioned, casually, to Sandra that he'd need to start seriously exploring student loan options given the program's substantial cost. Sandra, caught somewhat off guard, mentioned that Richard actually had something set up for this a while back, which led to a confused, increasingly tense conversation where Connor learned, for the first time, that a substantial education fund had existed in his name for over a decade and had recently been redirected elsewhere. He called me directly, understandably upset, asking why I hadn't told him about it sooner and why it had suddenly disappeared right when he actually needed it. "I've been building that fund quietly for 11 years, Connor," I said. "I never mentioned it because I wanted it to be a genuine surprise when the right moment came, not a bargaining chip for closeness. When you told Melissa's family, I wasn't really part of this family, just someone your mother married. I took that as an honest, clear statement of how you actually see our relationship." I redirected the fund to reflect that same honesty. Connor was quiet for a long moment on the phone before finally saying, "I didn't mean it like some kind of official statement, Richard. It was just how I've always talked about it. I didn't think it would actually change anything real." "That's exactly the problem," I said. "For 12 years, I've quietly supported this family in ways you never fully saw or acknowledged, while you've comfortably categorized me as someone outside it whenever convenient. I'm not angry about the dinner comment specifically. I'm just no longer interested in quietly funding a relationship you've made clear, more than once, you don't consider real. We didn't resolve everything in that single conversation, honestly." Connor apologized, somewhat awkwardly, acknowledging that he'd never actually considered how his casual dismissiveness over the years might connect to something as concrete as an education fund he hadn't even known existed. I told him I appreciated the apology, but that rebuilding an actual relationship, if that's what he wanted, would need to happen through genuine effort over time, not through reinstating a fund out of financial pressure. Connor ultimately took out student loans for his graduate program, which he's managing responsibly. Our relationship since that conversation has actually improved somewhat, ironically, not because of the fund, but because losing it forced an honest conversation neither of us had been willing to have directly for 12 years. He calls me Richard still, not Dad, and that's genuinely fine. What's changed is that he no longer describes me, even casually, as simply someone Mom married. Emily, my niece, is thriving in her own undergraduate program now, genuinely grateful for support she never expected, and frankly, never needed to perform false warmth to receive, since her warmth toward me was always genuine regardless of any fund's existence. I didn't redirect that fund out of spite. Exactly. I redirected it because quietly funding someone's future while they publicly define you out of their present isn't sustainable indefinitely, And sometimes the clearest way to correct 12 years of casual dismissal isn't through argument, but through letting your actual actions finally match the relationship someone's words have already described. If this story got to you, the next one is even more unexpected. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss it.